Imagine being dropped into a war that doesn't care who you are or why you're there. No flag on your shoulder, no orders to follow, just a country fractured by competing interests, each willing to pay you to tip the balance in their favor. One day you're helping Allied forces stabilize the region. The next, you're sabotaging their supply lines for someone else entirely. Loyalty isn't earned here, it's rented. And every decision leaves a mark, whether you intended it to or not. That was the core idea behind Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction. Not a story about heroes or villains, but about what happens when you hand a player unmatched power and let the consequences unfold. Today, we're looking at how Pandemic Studios built a sandbox where destruction wasn't just possible, it was the point. A game shaped by real-world headlines, technical ambition, and a simple philosophy. If you can see it, you can use it or destroy it. So load up your gear, cash your next contract, and join us as we step into chaos on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 281st episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are revisiting Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction, a game that dropped players into a fictional war-torn North Korea and told them, here's a rocket launcher, here's a deck of 52 enemies, go make some chaos. Developed by Pandemic Studios and released on January 11th, 2005 for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, it was a title that stood out in the crowded action market of its day by offering almost unprecedented freedom. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my brother, who has a habit of calling in his airstrikes just a little too close to my position for comfort. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, when you call in an airstrike, do you actually aim for the enemy, or are you just trying to keep me on my toes?
Well, it's usually friendly fire is on, and I'm trying to keep myself alive. So getting rid of you is actually probably better for the team.
I can't really refute that, unfortunately. I'm not going to pretend I'm the most careful partner when it comes to team shooters.
True.
I'm pretty reckless, actually.
That he is. There's no
So
lie.
I will take I will take that as an acceptable answer. I, I don't know. I can't refute it. And anytime you hit me with a dose of reality, I have to go, yeah, that's fair.
That it is, Dave. But sometimes it'd be that way.
Yes, indeed. All right, Mercenaries. Mercenaries Playgrounds of Destruction. You familiar with the Mercenaries series?
I cannot say I'm familiar with Mercenaries.
Not at all?
I know what
Huh.
mercenaries are, but not the
Got
game.
it. But not the game. Neither Mercenaries 1 nor Mercenaries 2. You know what? Did you ever play Just Cause?
I played one of them, but I couldn't tell you which one, and I didn't play very much of it.
Hmm. I don't know why I thought that this might be something that you'd enjoy, but you've kind of missed the two series that are kind of like this, so maybe I'm wrong. Well, we have a whole story to tell, and before we get there, why don't you share with our listeners some other things that have happened during this week in gaming history?
Sure thing, Dave. Kicking it off on January 14th, 1987, Zelda 2 The Adventure of Link was released for the Famicom Disk System in Japan, standing out as one of the most experimental entries in the franchise. Developed and published by Nintendo, the game departed from the original top down design in favor of side scrolling combat, RPG style experience points, and a structured overworld map. Players guided Link on a quest to awaken Princess Zelda by restoring crystals to six palaces while preventing Ganon's return. Its sharp difficulty curve and dramatic mechanical shifts made it divisive at launch, but over time, Zelda 2 has been reappraised for its ambition and lasting influence on later entries into the series. We explored its development and its unique legacy back in episode 182, so to learn more, go there.
I would go listen to that episode. You'll find out how we feel about Zelda and Zelda 2. It's Zelda 2 is a very unique entry in the series. I have an opinion. I'll spare you this episode for said opinion. Go listen to 182.
Yeah, go listen to that one and see what Dave
Yeah,
thinks.
I know. Good plug. Great job.
Well, speaking of great plugs, on January 14th, 1998, Magic the Gathering Duels of the Planewalkers was released for Microsoft Windows, serving as an enhanced standalone follow up to Microprose's earlier Magic the Gathering PC release. Developed by Microprose, the game refined nearly every aspect of its predecessor, improving AI behavior, streamlining the interface, expanding card availability, and polishing the RPG style Chandelar campaign where players roam the world battling rival mages. By faithfully implementing tabletop rules while offering smoother performance and a more cohesive adventure structure, Duels of the Planewalkers became the definitive early digital Magic experience for many players. Its success helped establish a foundation for future Magic adaptations, and this is a legacy that we explore in more detail back in episode 137. So there's your plug.
There's another plug. Great job. Way to
Indeed.
reference other episodes.
Well, on that same note, Dave, on January 11, 2005, Resident Evil 4 was released for the Nintendo GameCube in North America, marking a dramatic reinvention of Capcom's long-running survival horror series. Developed and published by Capcom, the game abandoned fixed camera angles in favor of an over-the-shoulder perspective, pairing precise gunplay with faster, more cinematic pacing. Players followed Leon S. Kennedy on a mission to rescue the U.S. president's daughter from a mysterious cult in rural Spain, uncovering the threat of Las Plagas along the way. Its refined controls, inventive enemy encounters, and memorable set pieces earned widespread acclaim and reshaped expectations for third-person action games. Often cited as one of the most influential games ever made, Resident Evil 4 left a lasting impact on game design, and the plug is that we talked about this in depth back in episode 229. So go there.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
3.
3 in a row. But sadly, we do have to break the streak.
We do. But before we retreat, the Resident Evil 4, excellent game.
It was one of the games of all time.
Listen to the episode because it went through so many variations. We kind of covered its whole design history, and it is wild how many different versions, like iterations of the design of that game they went through before they settled on where they are. So very, very, very interesting story.
Yeah, to learn more, go check it out, 229. And breaking away from our current standing of doing plugs for ourselves, the next one is just a plug for the game. On January 13, 2005, Mario Party Advance was released for the Game Boy Advance, offering a markedly different take on Nintendo's long-running party franchise. Developed by Hudson Soft and published by Nintendo, the game shifted away from the traditional multiplayer board game format in favor of a single-player, quest-driven experience designed specifically for handheld play. Players explored Shroom City, completed quirky missions for its residents, collected toy-like gadgets, and tackled dozens of short minigames along the way. While it lacked the multiplayer chaos the series was known for and received mixed reviews as a result, Mario Party Advance stood out for its willingness to experiment, earning a reputation as one of the most unusual and distinctive entries in the Mario Party series. And last up for this week in gaming history, on January 12, 2006, Enchanted Arms was released in Japan for the Xbox 360, marking one of the earliest traditional Japanese role-playing games to arrive on Microsoft's new console. Developed and published by From Software, the game followed Atsuma, a student with mysterious powers, as he journeyed through a technologically infused fantasy world to stop the resurgence of destructive devil golems. Enchanted Arms stood out for its cinematic presentation, fully voiced dialogue, and grid based combat system built around elemental strategy and collectible golems. While its linear structure and storytelling received mixed reactions, the game was praised for its combat depth and ambition. Today, Enchanted Arms is remembered as a formative early JRPG on HD hardware and an important step in introducing Xbox audiences to a genre more commonly associated with Japanese consoles.
Yes, indeed. It did not make an impact at the time. In hindsight, it was a great stepping stone to greater things.
It was one of the games of all time, Dave.
It was indeed one of the games of all time. Yes, indeedy. Yes, indeedy.
And speaking of one of the games of all time, I think we had to talk about something else today.
Yes, I think we do have a topic, right? Get on with the topic, Dave. We got things to do. That's what it always is.
It sure is,
Eh.
Dave. That's what I'm here for.
When we I know, just to hustle me along. Otherwise, I get sidetracked and I start ranting for God knows how long. So, you're a key component in keeping me down to my hour-ish length every week. We thank you for your service.
And with that, Mercenaries.
When we talk about Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, we kind of need to talk about this when it came out, the specific point in gaming history when it came out. By the end of early 2005, the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox were at the height of their popularity. And open world gaming as a genre was really finding its footing. Grand Theft Auto 3 was in that generation. Vice City had come out. They had really already shown everyone what was possible in a 3D sandbox. And just months before Mercenaries would kind of show up on everyone's radar, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas came out, and frankly, that just blew everyone away with its just sheer scope. It was the size and the depth was unlike anything we had ever seen before. Rockstar wasn't the only developer pushing boundaries at the time. Over in a London studio, Sony had given us The Getaway in 2002. That's kind of a more cinematic take on the crime sandbox. It went for gritty realism. We did a whole episode on that one in episode 224. On the PC side, we were gifted with Far Cry in 2004. Far Cry gave us wide open, destructible environments, showed us how they could work alongside a first person shooter. We covered that one in episode 82 if you wanted to learn more about its story. And the thing is that if you wanted to stand out in what was becoming a crowded landscape, this open world genre, you couldn't just build another open city for players to do things in. You legitimately had to give players something new to stand out. And this is kind of where Pandemic Studios comes in, right? Pandemic Studios understands this and they kind of said, sure, we're up to that challenge. Now, Pandemic Studios itself has a very interesting backstory. It was founded in 1998 by former Activision employees. They were Josh Resnick and Andrew Goldman. They weren't alone, though. Much of the talent that joined them came directly from the teams that had worked on games called Battlezone and Dark Reign, both Activision titles. And in many ways, Pandemic was born carrying forward those legacies. Their first projects reflected that heritage. Their first title, Battlezone 2 Combat Commander, came out in 99, and Dark Reign 2 came out in 2000. These are both PC titles that blended real time strategy with action elements. Now, neither one became a massive blockbuster, but both titles showcased the studio's willingness to tinker with hybrid genres and show off their ambition towards developing systems driven gameplay. That early work, those titles kind of set the tone for Pandemic's identity. It showed that they weren't afraid to take chances and they weren't afraid to push pre existing genres into new directions. Now, after experimenting with those PC hybrids, Pandemic shifted their focus towards consoles, which is where all the money was, and really that's where things took off for the studio. Their probably most unusual project of that period of the early 2000s was a game called Full Spectrum Warrior that would have come out in 2004. And believe it or not, Full Spectrum Warrior didn't start life as a commercial game. It began life as a US Army training tool. Pandemic built the title to teach squad tactics to soldiers, but when they presented it to the Army decided against adopting it widely. And so THQ stepped in as a publisher and they pushed it to the market as a commercial title, a shooter, squad based, that would come out on the Xbox and PC. And what made it stand out is that it wasn't a twitchy shooter, which was very common at the time. Instead, it asked players to think like a commander, moving fire teams from cover to cover in a way that felt genuinely more authentic than most of the other military games that were out at the time. It really straddled the line between simulation and entertainment, and that helped to earn critical praise, and that helped establish Pandemic's reputation for innovation. And then realistically, at the same time, they were working on another project. And a few months later, after Full Spectrum Warrior came out in September of 2004, they hit an absolute home run with one of Rob's favorite games, Star Wars Battlefront.
Fuck yeah, they did.
Star Wars Battlefront gave players something that they had been dreaming about for decades. It was a chance to fight massive battles in the Star Wars universe, right? You could hop into an ATST, you could fly an X-Wing, you could fight as just a simple stormtrooper, all while in some cases, 100 AI or human controlled characters clashed around you, right? It was chaotic, it was ambitious, and it was incredibly successful. Battlefront became one of the best selling Star Wars games of all time. It spawned multiple sequels, and that cemented Pandemic as a studio that now knew how to make large scale system driven sandboxes that were incredibly fun for people to play in. So by the time the team was gearing up for its next project, Pandemic had a track record of developing ambitious games, successful games on both the PC and the console. They weren't a studio at this point that were focused on small linear experiences. They were a studio that now specialized in huge sandboxes, giving players just tools in a sandbox and letting them do whatever they wanted. And so their next project is our topic today. And according to lead programmer Ron Piquet, the project didn't even begin as Mercenaries. In fact, it started as a pitch from Electronic Arts for a 3D revival of a title from the early 90s called Desert Strike. Desert Strike was one of a strike series. I think there was Desert Strike, Urban Strike. I can't remember any of the others. I liked playing them. And basically, you would pilot a helicopter through pseudo 3D environments. You'd be blowing up enemy bases and rescuing hostages. And so, with Pandemic having this track record of making these like sandboxes, it kind of felt that taking this Urban Strike series and putting it into that environment and updating it for what was now the PlayStation 2 really felt like a great fit. So that's why Electronic Arts came to Pandemic Studios. And for their part, Pandemic built a working prototype that put players in a chopper. You would fly around and you would blast installations. But over time, that project grew beyond just that narrow focus. When the publishing rights to the Strike series shifted from EA to LucasArts being the same company that had partnered with Pandemic for Star Wars Battlefront, the scope changed dramatically. So instead of being locked just into the cockpit of a single helicopter, the team began to think bigger. What if the player could hijack any vehicle they saw on the battlefield? What if the weapons weren't just props, but tools the player could pick up and use? And what if entire buildings and bridges could be reduced to rubble? As producer Matthew Paul explained, the team embraced a design mantra from the very top. If you can see it, you can use it, drive it, or destroy it. That single line became the backbone of the game's design philosophy, and it drove Pandemic to push the PlayStation and Xbox hardware as far as possible. The result was an open world sandbox where chaos wasn't just encouraged, it was absolutely the point. Of course, building a sandbox full of destruction was only half of the challenge. Pandemic, in a lot of ways, needed all this chaos to feel cinematic, and that's where the animation team came in. Lead animator Austin Baker later explained that his job was to oversee everything from basic walk cycles to the over-the-top takedowns that made each mercenary feel unique. There are 3 mercenaries available to you that aren't just palette swaps. They each move differently and they fought differently. The American mercenary relied on heavy, bone crunching punches, while the Swede used a faster, more vicious, go for the throat style. Even in an open world where you spent much of your time driving tanks and calling in airstrikes, Pandemic wanted the mercenaries themselves to have distinct identities. One of the other standout features that team worked on was something that Baker called action hijacking. Absolutely like my first impression of the game, one of my favorite things. Pandemic didn't want vehicle theft to feel just like opening a car door. They wanted it to absolutely be a spectacle. And so the tank hijack in particular became legendary. Your mercenary would literally sprint along the barrel, pry open the hatch, drop a grenade inside to clear the driver, and then slide into the seat just as the explosion was gone. And they developed this and other moments like this, animations that sold the fantasy that you weren't just playing as a soldier, you were literally a larger than life action hero. While the animators were making sure that tanks were hijacked with cinematic flair, the art team was busy tackling a completely different challenge. How do you build a convincing North Korea when almost no one on your staff has ever seen it? In an interview with art director Will Rosas, he later explained that Mercenaries had over 20 artists and animators divided into specialized teams. Concept artists to set the tone, asset builders to create more than 10,000 unique objects, and level designers to stitch it all together. And then, of course, you had the animation team that would bring all those characters and vehicles to life. The absolute scale of the project was enormous for the Pandemic team. They had to model hundreds of characters, more than 40 vehicles, and thousands of buildings, all of which could be potentially blown to pieces. Now, to keep the game manageable, the team divided the world into 2 massive maps. There was the North map and the South map, and those were divided into smaller sub maps that were all packed with points of interest. Each of these points of interest was based on real world regions or cities, and each had its own distinct look, unique architecture, statues, and landmarks to give the players a sense of place, even in the middle of all this chaos. And since reference material for North Korea was scarce, because, it's North Korea, the team pulled inspiration in wherever they could. They found web photos, secondhand stories about North Korea, and they borrowed elements from South Korea, China, and Japan as well. For highly publicized places like the DMZ or Pyongyang, they had enough imagery to work from, but the other not well known regions kind of had to be pieced together from all these scraps of information. And that mix of grounded detail and artistic license gave Mercenaries a world that felt real enough to immerse players, while still artistically stylized enough to make the factions clear and distinct on the battlefield. And that kind of brings us to the special effects, right? Because while the art team was responsible for modeling the world, back to lead programmer Ronald Paquette, who gave it life through what are really impressive fire and smoke systems for the time. Some of his explosions, they were crafted not with pre-built particle editors, but written directly from scratch. And they weren't just cosmetic touches. Pandemic tied the effects into a dynamic atmosphere system that would change the mood of the battlefield on the fly. So a clear sky could suddenly give way to clouds of smoke and haze as fighting broke out, which would turn a quiet, sunny farm into an active, hazy war zone in seconds. So the point of all this is that they really put a lot of time and effort into the details because they didn't just want to create this boring, generic open world. They wanted to create a living world. And the art team contributed to that to make sure that players really felt the difference as they traveled from one point of interest to the next. Now, if the art team gave Mercenaries its look, the sound team gave it its weight. Lead sound designer Island Majers of LucasArts recalled that her role was to create and oversee nearly all of the game's sound assets, from weapons and vehicles to ambient effects. Because Pandemic was focused on integrating audio into their gameplay, she had the freedom to focus on her audio content, asking herself questions like, what does it take to blow up a tank? And then going out to find the real answer.
Oh,
And that commitment to authentic, right?
okay. That's how blowing up a tank.
Yes, as a matter of fact. But also no.
Oh,
There.
okay. Interesting.
And so the result was a library of unique effects that gave every explosion and bullet in the game its own real tactile sense of force. Because when you do it this way, shooting into a car sounds different than shooting in the bricks. And these are the kind of details that, honest to God, we take for granted these days. Like, this is common sense. Like, you build a video game this way in 2025. You did not build a video game that way in 2005. Like, these smaller details, this was an art that game development studios at the scope by which Mercenaries was being made was really, they were all just learning how to do it at the time. The sound team wasn't just about these big moments, the gunfire and the explosions. They wanted to capture smaller effects too. So there were Foley artists at Skywalker Ranch that would stage recordings of footsteps, of gear shuffling, of close range impacts, and kind of layer them into the mix to make players feel closer to their character. And so they would combine that with their haze, smoke, explosion system that they developed, all that art team environmental work, and the soundscape just kind of brought everything alive. It genuinely made players feel like they were in a living war zone. It was chaotic, it was destructive, but it was genuinely grounded in reality. So as that team's doing all of its stuff, the design team, the programming team, the gameplay team, the game designers have their work cut out for them. At the heart of all this destruction sat one of Mercenaries' most brilliant design choices, which is its faction system. Now, lead designer Robert Georgievich called it the best part of the game. The idea was simple. North Korea had become a battlefield, and there were 4 rival groups that were all trying to exploit the chaos. The mercenary was a wild card, a one-person army who could be hired to do the jobs that none of the other 4 factions wanted to touch. And that dynamic gave Pandemic an excuse to let players work for anyone and absolutely double-cross everyone. Each faction has its own personality, leaders, and toys. The Allies were a multinational task force led by Colonel Samuel Garrett, who's voiced by Carl Weathers. They are bogged down by red tape because, that's what bureaucracy was at one time. But they packed the heaviest airstrikes in the game, from A-10 Warhogs to B-52 carpet bombs, because we have an impressive military, the Allies.
Amen.
The Chinese, under Colonel Zhang Peng, who was played by James Hong, leaned on absolute brute force. They had tanks, artillery, absolutely enough firepower to flatten a city block. The Russian mafia was there, led by Sergei Varanov. They were black market middlemen. They would sell the players everything from this person's sniper rifle to hacked Allied airstrikes. And then there were, of course, the South Koreans. The South Koreans were being advised by a CIA veteran named Mitchell Buford, who was voiced by Bruce McGill. And the South Koreans focused more on precision. They had stealth helicopters, they had AC 130 gunships, and they had cruise missile support, which was one of my favorites. This constant juggling of loyalties feeds directly into the game's central structure, which is what I want to talk about, the deck of 52. You know, your 10, I mean, there were cards for everything, but your high value targets were the big ones, right? Your 10, your jack, your queen, your king, your ace. So every card represented a high value target that was tied to General Song, which was the ace of spades, right? And so you would work your way up the deck of 52. I mean, have to work your way up, but you would work your way to get these high value targets that were all on this deck of cards, which is a really cool way to do it. You could complete these contracts for one faction or the other that would earn you intel that would reveal the location of the next target. So lower value cards were easier bounties, and they would reveal the locations of the face cards, you know, which were heavily fortified bosses. The more you worked with each faction, the closer you got to taking down, you know, North Korea's leader, which is Song, but more tangled the politics would become. Early on, it's kind of easy to take on. It's kind of easy to keep everyone happy. Rather, you take on a few contracts, you hand out a few bribes, everyone's happy. But the further in you get to taking out, you know, every faction's leadership, the angrier they get. And suddenly, like, there's no safe areas on the island by the end of the game because you're on everyone's list. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
And they deliberately made the choices difficult that way. One faction might ask you to sabotage another's airfield, while another would demand that you destroy a fuel depot in retaliation. Basically, the result is a world in which there are no clear heroes or villains. There's just shifting alliances, shady deals, and the constant pull of profit. And really, here in that concept, Mercenaries really comes into its own, right? The destruction was fun, the hijacks were cinematic, the art and sound teams had built a convincing war zone, but it was the faction system and it was the deck of 52 that really gave chaos meaning. It gave it added structure to the chaos. And I know that's funny to say, but it gave players something to look for and not just run around an open map and, you know, blow up everything for no purpose. It was the purpose. It just didn't ask you to do it from A to Z. You could take any path that you wanted to. Every job would move you closer to the ace of spades, but the path you took and the bridges you burned along the way were entirely your own. You know, Rob, hearing how the mercenary in Mercenaries Playground of Destruction can work for anyone, double cross anyone, and still get paid, it kind of reminds me of starting a podcast.
Are you saying that starting a podcast is like being a mercenary? Do I get to call in airstrikes?
Not quite, but think about it. You've got all these factions pulling you in different directions: recording, editing, distribution. It can feel overwhelming working for everyone. That's why you need Zencaster. It's like the ultimate mercenary, ultimate contractor for your podcasting needs.
Oh, so Zencaster equips me with all the tools, and I don't have to bribe the Russian mafia to get them.
That's exactly it. With Zencaster, you can record high quality audio and video right from your browser. There's no complicated setup, there's no expensive gear. Plus, its post production tools automatically clean up your sound. They remove background noise, they balance your levels, and they trim those awkward pauses.
That sounds easier than hijacking a tank for sure.
Much, much easier. And when you're ready to release your show, Zencaster helps you distribute it to all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, you name it. It's the full package without all the red tape.
All right, listeners, if you've ever wanted to start your own podcast, now's the time. No deck of 52 contracts required.
Head over to Zencaster, that's zencastr.com/pricing, and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Don't just play in someone else's sandbox. Build your own with Zencaster.
And now, let's finish selling our service to Zencaster and get back to the mercenary business at hand.
By the time Mercenaries hit shelves in January of 2005, players and critics were ready for something fresh in the open world space. That gamble on just sheer destruction absolutely paid off. Reviewers would praise the sheer freedom and chaotic fun, even if the story itself they felt wasn't much to write home about. And you typically find that with open worlds that try to be open. It's kind of a common design complaint for most of these styles of games, because the balance of trying to give people the freedom to do whatever they want while still having the structure of a story, those two things really antithetical to one another in a lot of ways, and a lot of games struggle to do it, and Mercenaries was not different in any way, shape, or form. So it had a story, which, as we know, beat the lower guys to get to the higher guy, to get to the higher guy, to get to the higher guy, which was the guy running, North Korea, because North Korea is bad, really basic. But who cared? Because you got to blow up everything, and that's why we all showed up anyways.
Yeah, pretty much. That makes perfect sense. Because, I mean, hey, most games are like that. It's easy and then it gets really fucking hard.
It didn't take long for Mercenaries to build a dedicated fan base. The sales of the original Mercenaries topped over 1.4 million copies across the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. That makes it one of Pandemic's biggest hits outside of Star Wars Battlefront. So that success, no doubt, would naturally lead to a sequel, which is Mercenaries 2 World in Flames, that would release in August of 2008. And Mercenaries 2 is a little on topic for right now. I'm not even going to pretend that when I was writing this episode, it didn't dawn on me how on topic it is right now. Because for Mercenaries 2, we go from North Korea to Venezuela
Oh, nice. Wow.
in a story inspired by real world headlines about oil, political upheaval, and international tension in South America. They
Jeez.
literally took it from the headlines at the time, but they could have taken it from the headlines in 2025 without any doubt whatsoever.
That's wild.
It is absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. It is quite literally what's going on in the world right now. That, there are outside factions that wanted to take over Venezuela because there's an evil dictator in charge of it, and we want their politics, but we want their oil. Yeah. Straight out of our headlines right now, no joke. It's crazy how it's crazy that sometimes art imitates real life, how on the nose that is sometimes, or life imitates art, rather, depending on how you look at it, since this technically came first. The core idea for Mercenaries 2 absolutely remains the same. You work for competing factions, you hunt down high value targets, and you blow up absolutely everything in sight. What the sequel did was take everything from the first game and kick it up 10 gajillion notches. Everything about the first game was dialed up to blockbuster proportions. You could topple skyscrapers, you could burn down oil fields, you could blow up every building. The skyscrapers would fall, they would crumble. Not just, because you threw artillery at it or a tank, but literally you had some of the most outrageous airstrikes out of any game I think I've even played to this day, in it. It brought me nothing but joy to play Mercenaries 2 and call in every airstrike and just watch every. I mean, they were huge. They were impressive. They were like, I mean, the closest thing I have by modern standards is Helldivers 2, right? And
Okay.
I would still take Mercenaries 2 over the Helldivers, like big bomb explosions. I think Pandemic did it much better, 20 years ago, roughly.
Well, goddamn.
It's just, who doesn't like blowing everything up? You know what I
Oh, I ain't
mean?
gonna deny that, Dave.
And they did it in spectacular fashion. One of the biggest new features for Mercenaries 2 was online co-op. It let two players wreak havoc together in real time. Really wasn't subtle. It was an absolute spectacle. Now, reception on the second game was a little more mixed. Critics and fans really loved the over the top mayhem, but Mercenaries 2, for whatever reasons, was plagued with bugs and AI issues and technical hiccups that really made it feel not as polished as the first game. I mean, and there could be reasons for that. We're not covering Mercenaries 2, but we can guess. We can guess, which we'll get to in a second. It did sell over 2.25 million copies across the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. And that proved that players were, more than happy to put up with that roughness in exchange for, I mean, what's probably some of the most satisfying destruction in gaming. Now, with that being said, both games did stir up their share of controversy. The original Mercenaries was criticized for using North Korea as its setting during a time of real global tension, right? Some accused it of being exploitative or insensitive. Others praised it for what they perceived as satirical framing and the mercenary focus as a way of dodging propaganda. But with that being said, the sequel was even more contentious. The Venezuelan government themselves blasted Electronic Arts, the publisher, and Pandemic, the developer, for portraying the country as a lawless dictatorship. Yeah, I know. Like I said, it's kind of funny how on the nose it is. They accused Mercenaries 2 of spreading negative stereotypes and even suggesting that it could be used as justification for foreign intervention. Can you imagine that? I'm not trying to get political or take sides, but if this administration, just a thought, if this administration, if we had woke up, because we all woke up the first day of the year, right? We all woke up from New Year's. The next day, they had, kind of invaded Venezuela overnight. If this administrator had gotten up in front of the country and was like, hey, we played Mercenaries 2, so we completely understand the political landscape in Venezuela, and we decided it was time to do something.
I mean, it may not be as far fetched as you think, Dave.
It's amazing, is what it is. Of course, EA brushed off the claims, right? They insisted that the game was purely fictional. When you load up these games, it's got your typical everything in this is purely fictional. We aren't making any intentional reference to any people, place, or thing, The backlash still made international headlines, which admittedly probably was good for sales. I mean, controversy always makes for good sales, no matter how you look at it.
That is a good point.
Unfortunately, even though Mercenaries 2 sold well, it marked the beginning of the end for the franchise and the studio. By this point, Pandemic had actually been bought by Electronic Arts. So they weren't just a publisher, it was now an EA studio. And Pandemic came out. They teased a third entry in the series called Mercs Incorporated. And it was canceled before it left pre-production. So we don't know anything about Mercs Incorporated. About, I wouldn't even say a year after that, because it was 2009, EA just completely shuttered Pandemic. So Mercenaries 2 ended up being kind of both a commercial high point I think Star Wars Battlefront was a commercial high point, Mercenaries 2 was definitely the swan song for both the studio and the series, right? Looking back, what makes Mercenaries Playground of Destruction stand out is how it took the open world formula that was genuinely thriving in the early 2000s and it kind of bent it in a new direction. There were games out there like Grand Theft Auto that were pushing story driven crime dramas. Far Cry was out there experimenting with these wide open natural environments. And Pandemic just took these ideas and asked a different question. What if the true appeal wasn't the story? Because we know it doesn't have a great story. But what if the true appeal was the freedom to experiment with destruction itself? And that question drove the entire design. Like we said from the beginning, the mantra was simple. If you can see it, you can use it, drive it, or destroy it. And so that philosophy just pushed everything. The hijacking of the tanks, the bridges that could be demolished, all the factions and relationships that, you could twist to your advantage. And for a generation of players, that freedom was amazing. It was intoxicating. It was something that they hadn't seen anywhere else. Of course, Mercenaries wasn't perfect. Its story was thin. Its AI was uneven. It wasn't as polished as Far Cry or Grand Theft Auto. I'll totally admit that. But those flaws really didn't matter because those aren't what I remember. Those aren't what most people remember when we think about Mercenaries. The moments are what we remember. The sprinting down the barrel of the tank to throw a grenade inside of it. The calling in a carpet bomb airstrike, or finally nailing one of the high value targets from the deck of 52. We remember those big, things that we did. It was a game that created stories through play, not through cutscenes. And that's a lot of why it's remembered so fondly. It proved that there was space in the open world genre for games that weren't about gritty crime stories or tightly scripted missions. They could just be about chaos, about improvisation. And when we got to the second one, about laughing with a friend as everything around you guys just crumbles to dust. I mean, how much fun is that?
Oh, a ton of fun.
And we have later games to thank for it. I asked you if you played Just Cause because when I think of the Just Cause series, which was in the same time period, you see a lot of that DNA in one another. Like I think that there was just a lot of opportunity for this type of game, and these developers were jumping on it. So we're here nearly 20 years later, looking at Pandemic, looking at Mercenaries, and Mercenaries to me stands as a reminder of what made that studio so special, right? It was their ability to just hand players a toolbox and trust them to kind of make their own fun. Now, of course, this is just one stop on our trip down memory card lane. If you'd like to explore more of the history behind open world destruction and sandbox design, you can revisit episode 224, where we looked at the getaway, or you can check out our coverage of Far Cry back in episode 82. You can, of course, find all those episodes and all of our others anywhere that you listen to your podcast or on our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can listeners find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics, know what we'll be talking about in our upcoming episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I either about episode topics, other gaming related topics, or who knows. It's a lot of fun over there. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to our ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I can be found on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology. We've even covered a circus, and we've done the history of chess before. When we sit down to research new topics each week, the most exciting part is finding out new and interesting things about the games we already know. Then we get to come on here and teach you all these fun things. It's a fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, which we celebrate by going roundtable and talking about what we've learned. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think that my biggest takeaway from all of this is the amount of dedication that the team took for the audio. Like you said, it's more commonplace today, and I think of games like Tarkov, where I've actually watched a lot of the video of the developer recording these sounds, and it's crazy to see them being made. But for the time, it's just not something we really thought of. It's it's commendable. It definitely created a standard for a lot of future games in that you really needed for it to sound good for it to be a truly good game. And I'm not saying games that had a little more cartoony or, excuse me, animated sounds weren't good, but it adds a large amount of flair to have all of the sounds pretty damn realistic. I just think it's really cool, Dave, to have all of that dedication. And yeah, that's my big takeaway. Is just something you didn't think about for the time that adds a lot of flair to a good game. So
I agree. I don't think that we spend a lot of time on sound design in this podcast. I know we don't spend a lot of time on sound design in this podcast. I tend to focus more on the technical and the person side of things. Um, but sound design is an incredibly important part of game design. And so much of how our emotions are tied up in games is very much tied to specifically the music. And so, yeah, I think a lot more credit should probably be given to those teams for sure.
absolutely. So what about yourself, Dave? What did you learn?
I enjoyed learning about, and I mean, and it's obvious when you look at it, but I kind of enjoyed learning. I got to read in depth about their design philosophy and how it panned out. Right, that whole if you can see it, you can use it, drive it, or destroy it. I think that's really fascinating. I also had no idea that this started out as a Strike Series game. Like, that it's fun to me to learn. I enjoy learning those weird fun facts. And that's definitely one of those weird fun facts that you'd never think of or never have a reason to know otherwise. Um, and it made me think about the Strike series, which I haven't had to think about in years because they never got around to making. They probably did get around to making them, but I don't play them, so it is what it is. All right, Rob. Well, that'll do it for our episode on Mercenaries, Playgrounds of Destruction. Before I wrap it up and look into next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will take one quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us to have you along as we play in our playground of destruction and knowledge and fun. So thank you.
With Mercenaries Playgrounds of Destruction, Pandemic showed how far a familiar formula could be stretched when a studio is willing to take risks. They certainly didn't reinvent the open world genre, but they did bend it towards freedom and towards destruction in a way that no one else had tried. The result was a game where the most memorable moments weren't found in cutscenes, but in the stories that players made for themselves, whether it was, sprinting down that tank barrel during a hijack, whether it was, cashing in their first high value target, or calling in that gigantic airstrike that leveled a building. The game wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without controversy, but those rough edges were definitely part of its charm. Mercenaries reminded players that games could be messy, chaotic, and still endlessly fun. And while Pandemic is gone, its vision of open world freedom, choice, experimentation, and spectacular destruction all still echo in the sandboxes that we all play today. So whether you're switching allegiances, blowing bridges, or just laughing at all the mayhem you've caused, Mercenaries reminds us that sometimes the best stories in gaming are the ones that you create yourself. Next week, we'll be trading the chaotic battlefields of Mercenaries for the quiet, moody halls of a rundown hotel. In 2007, Nintendo DS owners checked into Hotel Dusk, Room 215, a noir inspired adventure game that blended mystery, interrogation, and a striking hand drawn art style. With its sideways book mode presentation and emphasis on storytelling over action, it stood out as one of the most atmospheric titles on the handheld. Join us as we flip open our DS, pour ourselves a cup of black coffee, and investigate all of its secrets. And investigate all the secrets hidden in Hotel Dusk on next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-do-ow.